I mean, there was Paul's song. He wrote it when he was a teenager. But I know he had the song around in Hamburg even, way before we were songwriters.
I remember first hearing that song on the radio. That was the best buzz of all time. We knew it was going to be on something like 7:30 on Thursday night. It's going to be on Radio Luxembourg. And we all listened in, and there was, wow. From Me to You was really important because that kind of put the stamp on it. We had the first one, which did good. They let us back in the studio. We did the next one, and then we had the album, which did good. And then From Me to You, the next single, because remember, everybody would try to do in those days, make a single that sounded just like the one that was the previous one that was the hit. And we kind of avoided that, but if you notice, it did have the harmonica still on it, which was like a little trademark at that time.
We brought it to George Martin. Hey, George, and we did She Loves You, yeah. And the little 6-type cluster that we got at the end of it. George said, no. We said, why? He said, it's very corny, that end, a 6th. He said, it's like the old days, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, wah. He said, it's very corny. He said, I'd never do it. And we didn't understand. We just said, it's great, George. Such a great sound. He said, it's a 6th. We said, it doesn't matter. It's just great. And we just said, we've got to have it. We stuck out for that, you corny or not. So George would give us these sort of parameters. He'd say, you mustn't double a 3rd, or it's corny to end with a 6th. We said, we like it, man. It's bluesy. Classical people will say, no, you can't do that. So whenever I met that, I'd say, bloody well do it. We were in Paris one time, playing the Olympia in Paris, when back at the hotel, and a telegram came through from Capitol Records of America to Brian. He came running in the room. He said, hey, look, you're #1 in America. Well, just, I mean, I can't describe. We just, hey. We all tried to jump on Big Mal's back, and I remember running around the suite on Big Mal's back. Hey, you know, that was it. Like, we just didn't come down for a week.
Ringo, he was good at coming up with things like that. It was just a slip of the tongue, really. You know, he said it's been a hard day's night, you know, when we'd been doing a gig and driving and doing all that stuff, and he just said it. And we'd all fall around on the floor because Ringo would just say these things quite innocently.
While I was saying one thing, another thing would come in my brain and move down fast. There's actually a saying, there's a word for it, when you get two lines mixed up into one. We had a few of them, you know, Tomorrow Never Knows was mine. You know, God knows where it came from. Hard Day's Night was mine.
Quite often in the early days, John would turn up his guitar as loud as possible, and also everything at full stop. I mean, the knob on his guitar itself would round as far as it would go, and if he got too near the amp, he'd always have howlback, and this quite often ruined some of our good takes. But he loved the sound, and he actually got to the point where he could actually control it, and he used this as an idea to start off the track. And so you hear this feedback, I think it's the first time it was ever done actually, as an intro to the song.
I defy anybody to find the record unless it's some old blues record in 1922, the first pop record, where I had this electric acoustic guitar and it would feed back, and the little intro which goes is the first feedback. I claim it for the Beatles.
8 days a week. I remember writing that with John out at his place. Chauffeur drove me out this day, and I said, how have you been? You know, just normal conversation. How's things been? He said, oh, working hard. He said, working 8 days a week. And I'd never heard anyone say that expression. So I got to John's house, he dropped me off. I said, hey, this fella just said 8 days a week. He said, right. Ooh, I need your love. We were always looking for titles. Once you've got a good title, someone says, what's your new song? If you can say a title that interests them, you're kind of halfway there. Then, of course, the song's got to be good. But if you say, you know, oh, I'm on my way to a party with you, babe. Oh, okay. They say, but, you know, you sort of say 8 days a week. Or, oh, you know, that's good.
By the time we recorded Ticket to Ride, the Beatles were getting pretty good at studio techniques. It was John's song, so of course he sang lead, and Paul added a backup vocal. Paul played both bass guitar and lead guitar on this one.
While I was writing with John, when we were doing things like Help, I never could have seen that as a cry for help. Because it's two guys, you know, just two guys, young guys together. We was writing, when I was younger, so much younger than today. I'm more interested in going, when I was young, putting a little counterpoint to it, than listening to what he's saying. I mean, looking at his lyrics now, it's like, God in heaven, why didn't someone notice what he was saying, you know? I used to live in this little flat up at the top of a house, in a little room I had, and I had a piano by the bed, and I just woke up one morning with this tune in my head. I thought, I don't know this tune, or do I? It's like an old jazz tune or something, and because my dad used to know a lot of old jazz stuff. Well, maybe I've just remembered it or somewhere. So I sort of went to the piano, found the chords to it. You know, it was like in G, F sharp minor, 7, sort of B and that. And kind of just remembered it, made sure I remembered it. And then I just hawked it round to all my friends and stuff and said, what's this? You know, it's got to be something. It's like a good little tune, you know, and I couldn't have written it because I just dreamed it, you know. You don't get that lucky. It was one of those, you know, it was my most successful. And it's amazing that it just came to me in a dream.
This is a fairly rare, complete collaboration between John and Paul, because by the time 1965 came along, they were writing mostly their own stuff. This time was a productive period for the Beatles. I mean, they worked very hard, they worked very fast, and Day Tripper was completed one Saturday afternoon and evening.
We wrote We Can Work It Out together. Paul's first half, my middle eight. In the early days, once we left Liverpool, we were living in each other's pockets, so we wrote constantly together.
This was released with Day Tripper as a double A side, and We Can Work It Out was recorded soon after Day Tripper, and again was the result of a very close collaboration. And the lyrics show Paul in an optimistic mood, while John offers a more cautious note with his "Life is very short" message. And there's an unusual change in tempo, when in the middle it goes into a waltz.
I remember showing up with the idea for Paperback Writer, because I had a long drive out there, so I'd start writing on my way out, start thinking anyway. And I remember I had the whole idea. That was just one, and often John would have one. But with Paperback Writer, I just had the whole thing. And I virtually came in, had the bowl of cornflakes and said, hey, listen, how about if we write it like a letter? Dear Sir or Madam, and then comma, next line, paragraph, you know, as the case may be, or whatever it was. And I just wrote it all out on a little piece of paper. And John just sort of sat there and sort of, yeah, that's good. And with that one, that just kind of flowed, and I sort of wrote that. I was lying in bed one night, and you know that moment just before you drift off to sleep, this is a little limbo moment. And with me, one of the things I find myself doing, because I'm a songwriter, is I thinking of ideas for songs. And somehow in that little limbo moment, I thought, this might be good for Ringo, a children's song. Because Ringo was always very good with kids. And this idea of a yellow submarine, like a kid's book or something, came into my mind. So I think the next day I just started writing it.
It's one of the songs that has given me a career. Well, you know, it's like, do we all live in the yellow submarine or not? You know, it's a nice story, you know, a man who sailed to sea. Paul wrote it, really. And because of its childlike qualities, that was one they always sort of passed on to me. The interesting bit about the sound in the middle of that, besides the engine noises and the water which was blowing in a straw, I mean, we did all our own sound effects. And I was at one end of the studio shouting, "Up to caper!" And John was in another, "Hey, Captain, out here, Captain!" You know, we all just sort of made it up on the spot.
Let me tell you a story about Eleanor Rigby. There was this old lady, I think in Gambia Terrace, where John and Stu had a flat. And I always used to feel very sorry for old spinster ladies sort of living on their own. And something made me want to kind of help them, I don't know. So she, in my mind, was always the kind of prototype for Eleanor Rigby. Of course, it developed in the writing. I mean, immediately she became someone who cleans up in a church, you know, which it's just fiction, all of that. But the prototype were some of these lonely people I used to see when I was a kid, you know.
Penny Lane is not only a street, but it's a district. It's like Times Square or Columbus Avenue. When you say Columbus Avenue, you mean the whole area, or Times Square is more than one street. Penny Lane is a suburban district. I lived in Penny Lane in a street called Newcastle Road.
I remember saying to George Martin, what, like a very clean recording. I was into clean sounds, maybe Beach Boy kind of things at that point. But, you know, the fireman with his hourglass and all of that sort of stuff was us trying to get into a bit of art, a bit of surrealism. And they were all based on real things. But, I mean, whereas there was a barber called, what was he called, Bioletti? Something like that. Little barber, I think he's still there, actually, in Penny Lane. And he had these pictures of haircuts in his windows. A barber showing photographs like it's an exhibition. It was all just twisting it to a little bit slightly more artsy angle. The nurse who's selling poppies from a tray, which she thinks she feels as if she's in a play, but she is anyway. All that sort of stuff was all the little sort of trippy little things we were trying to get in. All You Need Is Love is basically, I think, a simple message, but it's a good song. John sings it great. And I think it's affected a lot of people, you know. And I still think the message is really true. I think that it is what people need still.
Because the mood of the time, it seemed to be a great idea to do that song, because while everybody else was showing them people knitting in Canada and Irish clog dancers in Venezuela, we thought, well, we'll just sing All You Need Is Love, because it's a kind of subtle bit of PR for God.
Maybe it was to make up for the very repetitive chorus, but this was one of their most complicated and most full productions they'd achieved, actually. The rhythm track was chock-a-block with all sorts of exotic Latin American instruments, bongos, maracas, conga drums, you name it. And at the end of the song, they break into a kind of Maori chant, which was not a bad idea for an ending. In fact, when they made the promotional film for the song, they booked some hula dancers to dance along with the Maori chant. And that maddeningly repetitive chorus was very difficult to get out of one's mind, so it obviously worked.
I used 3 different drum kits. I had a kit made for a giant. I was feeling rather big those days. I had this giant kit made, and I didn't think, you know, this is what you do and you don't really think it out. So I had this giant bass drum and tom-toms and this giant snare. Well, the snare was so big, I couldn't get my leg to the bass drum. So we could never use it as a kit, but it was fine for miming. And then I had the mini kit. So that was just my bit of fun, like the kit was doing that. And it was a good shoot.
Now, this is one of Paul's great piano tracks. His rocking keyboard is the focal point and provides a marvellous backing for his high-powered vocal.
Our roots are rock and roll and blues and country and western. The covers we used to do when we were a cover band were all that type of music. And the thing that makes Lady Madonna funky is the bass piano line.